Okay, we're going to have some icebreaker questions to get things warmed up. First question, the most interesting man or woman in history?
Gosh, is my microphone on?
Yep.
It is. Most interesting man or woman? Well, I think a woman who deserves more attention is Jo van Gogh, which was Vincent van Gogh's sister-in-law, Theo's wife. Without her, probably none of us here would have heard of Vincent van Gogh. After he died, after Theo died, it was Jo who put in tireless effort to turn this random, insane Dutch artist into the superstar he is now.
Okay.
So, Jo van Gogh.
All right. Language you always wanted to learn but never got around to?
No, Hungarian, of course.
O magyar nyelv, fantasztikus. Guilty cultural pleasure.
Bloody hell. Well, look,
that's not an answer.
Guilty cultural pleasure. Well, look, I'll be honest, I don't really like Baroque architecture. I can't really stand it, but from time to time, I do secretly go into some sort of 18th century church and secretly admire the architecture.
Okay, so you're a secret admirer of Baroque architecture.
But professionally and officially, I don't like it.
Okay. So. The ugliest building in the world?
Well, look, there's no single answer, but here's one for you. The pyramids in ancient Egypt, the Great Pyramid of Giza. Because to me, the Great Pyramid of Giza, it's almost like we look at it and we think, oh, it's so interesting, it's amazing, it's beautiful. But if that were built in 2023, we'd all hate it, probably. We'd think, oh, look, another crappy, horrible big skyscraper. It's aged. Just because it's 5,000 years old, which is quite impressive, we admire it. And I think we should look at it with more critical eyes.
Okay. The book everyone here needs to read about culture.
To be honest with you, I love books. I mean, this is the book I'm just reading. I just happened to bring it with me. But I think we could do with reading less books and with more looking. So like with art, say, or history, I think the problem is if you read a book about art and then you go and look at a painting, you're going to be thinking about movements, about this painter, this technique, this style, and some critic will be using these really long, ridiculous words. The best thing you can do is just look at it and think for yourself about what you're seeing about a painting. You know, everyone, the Mona Lisa is the best painting in the world. Well, we've just been told that. You need to go and look at it, even in an image online, think about it and decide, is this good or not? Do I like it?
So no books?
Well,
no books.
No books then, just looking.
If you could change one point in history, what would it be?
I wouldn't.
You wouldn't?
No, nothing.
Okay. No revisionism here?
No revisionism at all.
And last question, Twitter or X?
X, formerly known as Twitter, is what we usually go with.
Great. Sheehan, it's lovely to have you here. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Were you a bookish kid, a nerd, reading all day long when you were back from school? What was your background?
Well, my background? Well, I'm from England. I'm from the middle of nowhere in England. I will say this actually by way of background. I'm not an expert. A lot of people here talking, they're incredible experts, right? They're specialists in their field, they've done research and study, they know what they're talking about. I'm not an expert whatsoever. I did a law degree in England, but I didn't want to be a lawyer. So after graduating 5 years ago, I did a few different jobs. I worked as a security guard, then I worked at McDonald's most recently, and then here's a strange twist of fate. So exactly 500 days ago today, exactly 500 days, I started a Twitter account. I quit my job, said to my girlfriend, look, I can't work at McDonald's anymore, I want to really do something with my life. So I did everything. I applied to the army, I applied to film school, and I started a Twitter account as well. And then 500 days later, it has a few followers, and I'm in Budapest speaking to all of you. So,
were you expecting 1.5 million followers 500 days ago?
No, absolutely not. I mean, it's easy with hindsight to say that I was destined for this. Yeah. But no, not remotely. I mean, it was partly a passion project, you know. I felt like I had a lot of things I just wanted to say, a lot of things I wanted to write about and talk about. And where do you do that in the 21st century? On the internet. So
you are known as the creator of the Cultural Tutor newsletter and X account. When did you, so you started it, what, 500 days ago?
Yes, exactly.
And what was your aim? When you started it, what did you want to achieve?
Well, two things. The first part, the honest part, is that I wanted to make some money. I didn't have any money. I owed all my friends and my parents money. I wasn't earning enough for McDonald's. and I wanted to make money. But not just in any way, I wanted to do something that I loved. So I thought, well, if I can make a living by writing, because I always wanted to be a writer since I was 5 years old. I mean, I think I've written probably something every day for like 15 years. You know, on my laptop, I've got all sorts of novels and poetry and plays, whatever, that I never finished. But then the other part with making a Twitter account was that I felt, look, ultimately, I mean, this sometimes surprises people, but I made it for myself. I wanted to learn these things. I wanted to learn more about art and architecture and music. And when you're writing about something, you learn about it much quicker. And as it happens, I think a lot of other people share this feeling, this desire to learn a little bit more about culture, about the past, let's say, and they liked it.
And with so many followers now, do you feel any sort of pressure? You know, you've got all of these people who are following every word that you write.
No, not really. I mean, I do still feel pressure, but the pressure comes from myself. I think if any of you write or have an audience, the worst thing you can do is start to think about that audience. To think that 1 million people are going to read my words, I mean, it's bizarre, isn't it?
It is.
I mean, some of the things I've written, some of the tweets that have gone viral, as they say, have been read by like 20 or 30 million people. Which doesn't make any sense to me, but my audience is myself. I write for myself. I want to learn it, and I read it, and I try and set my standards high. And if I'm happy with it, if I can stand by it, if I think it's good, then I'll put it out there. And if anyone doesn't like it, well, fair enough. And
how do you make ancient philosophy sexy? What's the secret recipe?
Sure, I don't know, is the honest answer. Although I will say, I think my non-academic background helps.
Right.
So if I'm writing about ancient philosophy, you know, say about Socrates or something, I'm not coming from a place of having studied classics at university. I haven't read all the textbooks. All I've done is pick up a few bits here and there, and then I read the Apology of Plato about Socrates' trial and thought, oh wow, this is amazing. I wish this is really interesting. And I write about it from a place of passion, of just because I find it so interesting. Hopefully, maybe that comes through in my words.
And you talked about some of the posts. What was your most popular post? What was it about?
Yeah, that is interesting. So after about 6 weeks of this Twitter account, I'd ground my way to about 20,000 followers. And then one day I'd written something and it didn't do very well, and I thought, God, this is it for me. No one cares what I have to say, it's over, I can go back to McDonald's. And I was kind of, I was a little bit angry. I sort of thought, I need to do something. And anyway, for years I've been walking around with my friends moaning about what we might broadly call minimalist design. The way the world seems to be becoming less detailed, less colourful, less thoughtful. So I put all of that anger, not anger exactly, but concern that had built up over 10 years, and I wrote this thread in about 20 minutes called The Danger of Minimalist Design and the Death of Detail. And it was a little bit about how, look at this table. It's sort of a little orange table with 3 legs, and that's about it. Which is fine, it does its job. But maybe it'd be nice if it had a little bit of detailing, some color, a little mosaic on top, some carvings, I don't know. Anyway, and this thread, I went to bed and I woke up and it had like 300,000 likes on Twitter, and sort of 50 million views, and then it got up to 500,000, and my followers boomed after that. So that was the biggest one, the danger of minimalist design, about how the world is maybe not what it used to be. And the thing is, I would probably rewrite every word of it now. I'm not exactly sure I spoke or wrote in the best possible way, but clearly people felt similarly. I mean, just look at like brand logos. They're all getting simplified. All these brand logos, I mean, it's an odd thing to talk about, but even brand logos for big companies used to be more colorful. Maybe they had a serif font, let's say.
Yeah.
And then now they all look the same. They're all colorless. I mean, even cars. There's this wonderful statistic that, like, I think before 1975, in the 70s, more than half of cars had sort of, how would you say, different colors. Whereas now the vast majority of cars are all grayscale. The world is literally becoming more grayscale. Yeah. And a lot of people evidently feel that way. And I think that's why it did so well.
So they say the internet makes us stupid, yet you are the living counter-argument to that.
Well, I hope so.
Well, what's your take on the net and its influence?
Look, the internet, I try to think about it in this way. What would Erasmus, Erasmus?
Yeah.
If any of you know Erasmus, he's one of my heroes, the great Dutch scholar of the 16th century, a force for education and literacy. what would he think of the internet? You know, the internet is every single book ever written at your fingertips for free. I mean, the power, the resource, connecting. I'm here because of the internet, right? The potential it has to do good is just extraordinary. But as with everything, there's a lowest common denominator. And the internet, it preys on our weakest instincts, as it were. Look, I like memes. I like videos of, you know, chimpanzees dancing and otters swimming and this sort of thing, as everyone does. But eventually, TikToks, memes, whatever it is, it's not enough. Man does not live by bread alone.
Yeah.
And I think all I've done, it's not very complicated. I've just brought something which is, I hope and I think, a little bit more meaningful than the content we usually see. And I hope when people read the things I write, they're not just doom scrolling. I don't know if you're familiar with this word, doom scrolling. Do you know it? Where you're sort of just on your phone doing this, passing the minutes of your life away. And for 5 minutes, just to read about a painting or a building and sort of feel a little bit uplifted, a little bit engaged. And you go outside and maybe you open your eyes and see the world a little bit more brightly. I think people want that, and I humbly hope that's what I've managed to do for some people.
Now, when we think of the title here, How to Take Back Social Media from Mindless Influencers, what do you think about contemporary influencer culture?
I mean, look, I don't like to criticize people too much. Everyone's trying to get along in the world. But there's a wonderful line from Pliny the Younger. He was a Roman lawyer around in the 1st century AD, and his letters have survived. And they're wonderful, the letters of Pliny, because they're just remarkably modern. It feels like anybody in this room or you or I could have written them. And he's writing to a friend who had said to him, you know, no one cares anymore. The past used to be better. I mean, this is a funny thing when you read history. You realize everyone in the past thought the past times were even better. Anyway, in this letter, Pliny says, you know, we can't sit around and moan that no one cares. We've got to write something worth reading for the people. And that's my sort of tangential answer. It's easy to moan about mindless influences, but if you're not looking for the better things, if you're not writing and creating the better things, then you can't complain. But a thing like Pliny, it's up to us to create something worth reading, and I hope, again, what I've done. I mean, you know, a friend of mine said to me, I never thought when you started an account talking about art and architecture, you know, Gothic architecture, about El Greco or whatever, any particular painter, that so many people would be interested. And if I'd taken that mindset and thought, well, no one will care, then I would never have done it and I wouldn't be here. So it just shows that if you do create something that's worth paying attention to, that's maybe better than the mindless content, that they will pay attention.
Well, I guess, you know, what you're writing about is educational. You're bringing to people's attention our past. And we always say, you forget your past, there is no future. So let's talk about the future of education,
Okay.
which I know is a subject dear to your heart. History is sometimes bad-mouthed today as a story of dead white males. Do you agree with the current trend of revising curricula? Would you rather revise the critics?
Look, I'm always in favor of scrutiny of history, but my concern is that the people on both sides aren't looking at it critically. There's an agenda.
Yeah.
So on one side, you might say it's sort of the liberal progressive movement. There's an agenda there. But I think on the right, the conservative movement is also pretty reactionary, and they're not looking critically either. It's important when you read anything, history, to see that there can be good and bad. Two things can be true at once. A good person can do a bad thing, a bad person can do a good thing. So, I mean, I don't know if I'm sort of avoiding the question exactly, but what I think is most important isn't always with education, it's not about facts. It's about trying to give people the faculties to be able to look at things for themselves. And if we do that, then we don't need to revise history and try and spin it a certain way, because people will be able to look at it for themselves and think about it and come to their own conclusions about what was good or bad. But of course, meddling with history is always concerning, but it's nothing new. I mean, you know, what the hell with the, you know, the Assyrian reliefs from 2000 BC of these kings carving, I can't remember the name of the relief, there's one in the British Museum, and it's the king on the lion hunt with all his chariots and soldiers. That in its way is him trying to write a history in which he is the central figure. So revisionism is nothing new. It's one of the oldest challenges there is, in fact.
But then, of course, the role of teachers, because we're obviously an audience largely composed of students who are reliant to some extent on their teachers, their lecturers, their tutors. Do you get any sense that the process of revisionism is leading our educators into a rather more narrow interpretation of history?
Look, but perhaps, I mean, the truth is this. I mean, I did a law degree, so I don't know what the hell it's like to study English or literature or poetry or whatever it is. Look, I sympathize with teachers. They're people like you and me. They've got a job. They're working in an organization. There are budgets, there are deadlines, there are time constraints. It's very easy to throw mud at other people. I don't know what it's like to work as a teacher professionally, so I can't necessarily criticize them. And look, I don't want to speak about something I don't fully understand. So I don't know what it's like in universities exactly. But the good thing is, whether it's good or bad, we have the internet, right? Which is how I partly received my own education in the classics, I suppose, and mainly by reading books, of course. So again, I'm slightly refusing to answer your question.
But are tweets enough to learn about our past and our culture?
No, they're not enough. Of course they're not. But maybe they're a beginning. And you know, one of the things that means the most to me, when people get in touch with me, they say, look, I read your... So a few days ago, I wrote about this Japanese artist called Kawase Hasui. I stumbled across him, and I thought he was wonderful, and I wrote about him. And then somebody got in touch with me, a few people, and said, wow, I'd never heard of this guy before. Now I've gone and done a load of research online, and I've bought a book about him, and I'm going to read it. And suddenly, it's no longer just a tweet. It's kind of a spark that kindles a fire. So maybe it's a good starting point, and that's what I'm trying to do, maybe creating some noise and turning people's heads away from TikTok, maybe, and towards a book or two.
Well, I suppose that's my next question really is about that. We've got a whole range of different social media.
Yeah.
Twitter, X, TikTok, Instagram, etc., etc., etc. Do you differentiate between them?
Well, I only use Twitter, X. In my spare time, I don't really use social media very much, TikTok or Instagram. But I mean, what I will say is this. Again, it's easy to sort of become disillusioned and think about these, you know, mindless influences. But if you go online and you look, there are some incredible people. Think of YouTube. I mean, I suspect a lot of people in the audience, maybe the younger people, have learned a lot of things from YouTube. And if you find the right accounts, there are these people who, you know, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, they'd have been writers or academics or whatever it is. But because of the internet, they're now YouTubers. And it doesn't sound quite as official. But you know, some people think the world is getting worse. Maybe it is. I don't know in some ways. But there are extraordinary people out there if only you look for them. And I mean, again, this isn't really directly to your point. But I think this is important to remember. Just because someone is a YouTuber or someone who has a Twitter account doesn't mean they're any less valuable a source of information and learning and knowledge as somebody who's a professor at university.
I can completely relate to that. Before I started learning Hungarian full-time in London, I spent about 3 months following a YouTuber who was talking about Hungarian pronunciation.
Wow.
And that sort of at least gave me a bit of a head start in trying to learn this extraordinarily difficult language. Bonyolult. Very difficult. Why do you think the past is important? I mean, we're always told you have to learn the lessons from the past, otherwise we repeat them again in the future. Does it make us better people?
Not necessarily. You know, look, I struggle with this question. I'm not going to pretend that I have some sort of answer that I'm going to wheel out and say that. You know, sometimes I wonder, why is it important to study history? But you know, there's that line I think from Churchill that the further back you look into the past, the more clearly you can see the future. And that's the way people usually think about it. But I'm not even sure it is about the future. I try to think of it from a point of view of individuals, really, and the way it affects your life when you know about the past. So to give you one small example, you know, I think I used to be a lot more critical of the modern world. And then the more I read history, as I say, the first thing I learned is that everybody has always been moaning about the present and everyone's always talking about the good old days. And secondly, you realize how lucky you are In between, you know, like I flew here on a plane from London, and I'm staying in a hotel with clean water, hot water, and I can walk around safely on the streets. I mean, this is a miracle. I mean, you open a history book and you realize history is filled with terror and death and destruction and poverty and disease and misery. And when you read that about history, you suddenly think, bloody hell, you know, I'm blessed to be born when I am. And it's not an excuse to do nothing, of course. Things can still get better. It's not like there aren't any problems. But that's just one small example of how I think a study of history can bring you to see yourself in the present much more clearly, in the way it can shape the way you feel and behave from day to day. And you can take inspiration when in the hard times in your life, when you think, God, how can I keep going? You know, I think of Boethius, locked in his cell in 521 AD, had been kind of betrayed, and he's in prison awaiting execution. And he writes a book, The Consolation of Philosophy. And he comes to the conclusion that he has nothing to be worried about, that he should be happy. You know, and that's remarkable to read that, and that's 1,500 years ago. You read that bit of history, and it suddenly makes you feel a little bit brighter, a little bit more positive in the present day. So that is...
So thinking about, you know, feeling better about yourself because you're recognizing, you know, what's happened in the past and the times have been more difficult, let's look to the future of social media. Now roughly sort of 10 years old, 10, 12 years old. How do you see that evolving?
I don't know. I'm not an expert in social media. I tend to say I don't know to a lot of questions. I mean, what I will say is that it feels a bit odd now that it's 10 years old. I mean, some of you, I'm not sure, I guess a lot of you are students and you're pretty young. So I don't know if you remember the kind of golden age of the internet. So YouTube, say, you know, there didn't used to be an algorithm and there were no ads. You just go on YouTube and watch a video, there were no adverts, and there weren't recommendations. That's changed. Now there's the algorithm across them all. And it's centralizing it to some extent. That's the impression I get. I mean, you know, the internet was probably like the Wild West a few years ago, and now it's being drawn together, which is the tendency we have, which is potentially concerning. The beauty of the internet is that it's a free-for-all, and it's democratic, as they say. The fact that it may be being drawn together when you have a handful of companies who rule it, each with their CEOs, that concerns me somewhat.
So the danger of the corporatization of social media, the danger of blandness.
Yes, yeah, which may be already happening, certainly.
And in terms of your own personal sort of ambition now, where you've got this huge following, you're educating people about the past, what next for you?
Well, my dream was always to write a book. I've actually written a few novels, and I tried to get them published, and no one cared, no one was interested. And then suddenly you get a few followers on social media, and everybody's asking you to write a book. I guess because they know you've got an audience to sell it to. So the next step is writing a book, a useful book for people, interesting, meaningful, beautiful. Write that book, and then continue the journey wherever it takes me. I don't really plan much. I don't tend to plan more than one day ahead, to be honest. So I can't talk about years in the future. Anything could happen. Anything could happen.
Okay.
You know, I'd love to actually learn about architecture. I write about architecture all the time. I would like to get my hands dirty and actually do it. Maybe. Something like that, let's say.
Good luck with that.
Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please give a lovely, warm round of applause to Sheehan Quirke. Thank you.